It happened at the Emmanuel African Methodist Episcopal Church, Mother Emmanuel, as everyone here calls it. Wednesday night prayer service and Bible study, all welcome, no questions asked. A young man walked in, took a seat, and waited for up to an hour. And then police say Dylan Ruff stood up and started shooting. In the end, there were 9 dead, 1 injured, and countless broken hearts here.
The suspect in the church shootings allegedly maintained a website that included a manifesto and contained photographs of the 21-year-old posing with guns next to a Confederate flag.
The plainly racist aims of the terrorist shooter have left many here and across the country wondering, frankly, why the flag is still flying on the grounds of the South Carolina Capitol.
Removing this flag from out front is not going to do anything to change this nation.
The massacre of 9 African Americans in a Charleston church last week by suspected white gunman Dylan Roof has fueled a nationwide movement to eradicate symbols of the Confederacy.
In response to the recent debate over the use of the Confederate flag, many Arlington citizens have expressed their opposition to the usage of Confederate names. There are 2 main arguments to this debate. One side believes upholding the names is offensive since these leaders fought to keep slavery. The other side believes that remembering Confederate generals is a way for them to honor their history and heritage.
We do have Route 1, also known as Jefferson Davis Highway, and then there's Washington Lee High School and Lee Highway. Those are kind of the ones that people are talking about.
Yes, I would like to see it change. To what name? I don't know. But I like to involve myself or surround myself with people who understand the history of it and would like to see the name change. It's the same thing in terms of South Carolina when that flag came down.
The Confederate flag stands for hatred. So that in itself is just one symbol that means hatred. So to be having that publicly means that you hate black people. That's exactly what that means.
It's something that I've been thinking about for a while, and it kind of didn't make sense to me that we had roads named after Jefferson Davis and other Confederate generals.
I think that removing Robert E. Lee's name is important because our institutions have to reflect our current understanding of, who deserves to be recognized. And I think that Lee no longer fits that mold for a lot of people.
For different folks, for different reasons, it's somewhat uncomfortable to live on Jefferson Davis Highway.
As Arlington is typically a more liberal area, we found it a challenge to find those who are willing to defend the use of Confederate names, especially on camera.
You have reached Broadway residents. Hi, it's a great day at Randy Burb's Equipment. Sorry we missed your call. You've reached 563-6834. We can't answer.
Words have a way of getting twisted around, and there's so much crap going on about all this stuff that's been happening lately. I'm not making any statements to anybody about anything at this time.
All right, that's fair enough.
But after several rejections, we were able to find those who felt very strongly in their beliefs regarding the Confederate history, and were happy to voice their opinions.
Well, my name's Lawrence Graham, Graham, and I was the 4th Brigade Commander with the Virginia Division. There's a total lack of knowledge in terms of why the war between the states occurred. And it was not based upon slavery whatsoever. It was based upon taxation, not slavery. Slavery was only brought up, believe it or not, during the war between the states because Lincoln was very close to losing the 1864 election. So the only way that he could gain enough support to be reelected was to gain the support of the abolitionists at the time.
That is a false statement. The Confederate flag and the Civil War was started because slave owners didn't want to give up their slaves. The South were paying taxes, but they were also holding slaves.
A lot of people think the Confederacy was formed and based on slavery, protecting slavery. Well, that's not true at all. We look back at the history of slavery, this is a national problem. It wasn't just a problem confined to the southern states.
Jefferson Davis didn't live in Virginia. The road was actually named after him because the Daughters of the Confederacy went to the General Assembly in 1922 and lobbied for this road to be named after him.
Jefferson Davis, you know, he was a traitor. He symbolized being a champion of slavery.
Jefferson Davis was primarily known as the President of the Confederacy. He was a lifelong advocate for slavery and fought against California and other states around the country from becoming free states. He was initially against secession, but when the country continued to lose slave states in favor of free states, he and many other Southerners believed secession was their only option.
Jefferson Davis, and the fact that, he was just such a terrible man. He was one of the greater statesmen of the era. He just happened to make the mistake of accepting the position as president of the CSA.
This road runs from Arlington to the North Carolina border. It runs through all different kinds of communities, some of which are majority black, some of which are majority white. I think there's just this uneasiness about it being named after this person who literally had no connection to Virginia other than that he led the Confederacy.
Jefferson Davis Highway is absurd. I mean, Davis had basically no connection to Virginia. I mean, honoring Davis, who was pretty much a lifelong, unrepentant Confederate, is ridiculous.
The board has decided that we will put in our legislative package, which is our request to our General Assembly members, to seek a different name of some sort.
If you look at the various people that joined the Confederacy, they had nothing to do with slavery. I have over 40 relatives, ancestors, that were quite up there in terms of the Confederate Army. You know what? There was one thing in particular that they all had in common. Not one of them owned a slave. And why is the fact that so many people that supported the Confederacy didn't own slaves? There was only, probably 2 or 3% of the hundreds of thousands of people that fought for the Confederacy owned slaves. The rest of them didn't.
Well, my family members died in the Civil War too, and they fought for the Union. And, Robert E. Lee's, putting Robert E. Lee's name on Washington Lee High School certainly doesn't honor their sacrifice.
Well, just as important to honor the history of all soldiers, American soldiers, whether they fought for the Confederacy or for the Union. We honor the first revolution, the American Revolution, we honor those soldiers. These were the sons and grandsons of those same soldiers on both sides, so we need to honor them both.
In terms of the Confederacy, whose family members, whose great-great-grandfather, fought in the Civil War, and they died. There were slaves in the war who died, who didn't even understand nothing more than getting their freedom.
I'm a descendant of slavery. There's nothing I can do except talk about it. And so if you're a descendant of that, then you will probably have a different feeling than anyone else.
I don't think we're forgetting about history. There's a clear distinction between erasing history and choosing not to glorify history.
I think that a number of people will have their own reasons for opposing Robert E. Lee, recognizing Robert E. Lee. For me, probably the easiest one is the fact that he had sworn to defend the United States and he became a traitor to that oath. Although I think that Lee probably did oppose secession, when push came to shove, he decided to betray that oath and take up arms against his country.
Robert E. Lee was born and raised in Virginia. Lee is most well known for being a leading general in the Confederate Army, a position he was appointed to because of his military intelligence and skill.
Robert E. Lee owned property here in Arlington. Arlington House was where his family lived. He was married to George Washington's stepdaughter or granddaughter. So he has an Arlington connection. And if you talk to people who are students of the Civil War, they do talk about the way that he conducted himself post the Civil War, relative to slaves, relative to slavery, relative to how he treated his men and took care that they could re-enter society. So I feel like Robert E. Lee is in a little bit different category for me. That may not be true for other people.
Lee, oh my goodness, if you study his life and the goodness of that man, you know, they should be ashamed of reviling against him.
When I talk to people about Robert E. Lee, one of the things that they frequently mention is, you know, the enormous angst he felt over his decision whether to, you know, to be an officer in the Confederate Army or stay loyal to the United States Army that he'd sworn a commission to. And, you know, people cite this as sort of one evidence of his nobility. I think, you know, a good alternative would be to name it after George Thomas, who was another Virginian. He was similarly caught in the dilemma of whether to stay loyal to the United States or fight for the Confederates, and he stayed loyal.
I think it's just the absolute epitome of ignorance that people want to get rid of their history.
Yes, I would hope that all Americans would recognize that these are American soldiers that fought under the battle flag of the Confederacy, just as there were American soldiers that fought under the rebellious American Revolutionary flag. These are American soldiers. We need to honor them all.
I think a number of people that I know, you know, some of whom are, you know, African Americans, are profoundly offended by the kind of recognition that Virginia continues to give people like Lee and, you know, Jackson and Jefferson Davis even.
Slavery is an awful thing. It's an awful thing. You just can't defend it. When people talk about income inequality, ask the slave. They worked this land for nothing. For nothing. So people can't defend that. The highway is, to me, it's down here. It's like putting a Band-Aid on cancer. I would like to see it change, but it's not enough. You gotta change people's attitude. You gotta get rid of the cancer.
I have no strong feeling on changing the name only because it's history and it's what happened and it's just a name, and what the name stands for was negative to the black community, but it's also called Route 1.
Regardless of the petitions signed and the opinions voiced, there has still been no clear solution to this polarizing issue. The tragedy in South Carolina reminds us that America's dark past is still very much in our present, and it will take time to resolve how we recognize our history.
Uh-oh.